Hey, welcome back to Transform Your Workplace. I'm your host, Brandon Laws. This show helps you build a healthier, more human workplace with ideas that you can put into practice right away. Today's episode is sponsored by Xenium HR. And if you need support with HR, payroll, or developing your leaders, Xenium wraps around your team so you can focus on running the business. And a quick reminder, Xenium's 2026 workshops are now open for registration. You can sign up for sessions on topics like navigating change, productive feedback conversations, burnout prevention, emotional intelligence, and the Empowered Employee series. Check out the full calendar at xeniumhr.com/events, and we'll put a link in the show notes. All right, let's talk about today's guest. I'm joined by Martha Lawrence. She's a longtime publishing professional, former editor at Simon & Schuster and Harcourt, and the author of the new book, Catch People Doing Things Right, How Ken Blanchard Changed the Way the World Leads. She's worked closely with Ken for years and has been documenting his story since 2005. And in this conversation, you'll hear what Martha discovered about the real Ken Blanchard behind the public legend, why the 1-minute manager became a global phenomenon, how Ken and his wife Margie built a values-driven organization long before it was trendy, what catching people doing things right actually looks like inside a workplace, and a simple exercise Ken used to help leaders clarify how they want to live and lead. So if you care about leadership that lifts people up and makes work better for everyone, this conversation is full of practical ideas you can take back to your team today. All right, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Martha Lawrence. Martha, it is such a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
The honor is all mine, Brandon. You've got a terrific podcast here, and I'm really honored to be your guest.
Thank you. Today's a big day. You just released your book, Catch People Doing Things Right, How Ken Blanchard Changed the Way the World Leads. So I appreciate you coming on book launch day. I'm sure it's a very chaotic day for you.
Well, I'm glad that on book launch day, I'm doing a podcast that is so spot on and so relevant to the subject. So I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Yep. And let's dive in. I got a chance to have the physical copy of the book, got through it all. It's really well written. And as I mentioned before we started recording, clearly you did a lot of work before today happened. I think you said you started collecting interviews and manuscripts and things like that since 2005.
Since 2005, yeah, I knew right away, shortly after meeting Ken, that boy, somebody has to write his life story.
Yeah, so let's get into it. You said you first started working with Ken and you wanted to find out who the man behind all the hype was. And you said it didn't take you very long to figure out what made him so extraordinary. So from your firsthand experiences, you work so closely with him, what did you uncover about Ken, who he is really as a person behind the public image, and people know him as this leadership legend?
Sure. Well, a little background on me. I actually come from the publishing field. I was a book editor. I started at Simon & Schuster, and then I was an acquisitions editor for Harcourt for many years. So I had a real publishing background. And I first heard about Ken Blanchard, probably like a lot of your listeners, in 1982 when he published The 1-Minute Manager, which was everywhere. I mean, it was just everybody had that book. So I had known about Ken for a long, long time before I actually met him. And I found out that he needed an editor to help him with his books. He's, a prolific author, and I just jumped at the chance to work with him. So that's a little background. And for people who don't know who Ken Blanchard is, let me just say, okay, here's a guy who was told in college that he couldn't write, and he goes on to co-author one of the most impressive, successful books in the whole world. I mean, it sold tens of millions of copies. He was a university professor, and some of his advisors actually wrote in his recommendations that he wasn't particularly intelligent, wasn't academic enough, and yet he goes on to become what the American Management Association calls one of the foremost leadership authorities of the century. Okay. And then by his own admission, he can't even balance his own checkbook. And he goes on to co-found a global leadership development organization. So, that alone was worth writing a biography about. But what really inspired me to write the book was once I worked with him and found out that he is everything he appears to be publicly and more. He is truly walks the talk. He is a really, really wonderful human being. So that's why I wrote the book.
I love to hear that, because sometimes the public persona doesn't match who the person really is. And it's nice that you confirmed that what most of us believe is Ken. He's written more than 70 books, I think, co-authored or written. That's a lot. And a lot of them are translated into other languages, and just widespread influence that he has. So with such a vast body of work and global influence, how did you get the idea to write the book, the biography? When did it first come about? Clearly you started in 2005 collecting things, but why is now the right moment to capture the story?
Well, I think for a long time, and initially around the Blanchard organization, I would say, I'm thinking of writing. I'm an author. I have 7 published books to my credit, and I'd like to write a biography of Ken. And a lot of people are like, oh, I don't know. Do we really need to do that? I don't think so. It wasn't like Ken wanted this or the organization wanted it, but really, I just knew somebody had to document his life. And I'm a huge biography fan, like, the Steve Jobs, Walter Isaacson. I just finished the Pulitzer Prize. Oh, yeah. The Pulitzer Prize winning biography of Martin Luther King by Jonathan Eig. I just finished that on my vacation. I love biography, and I had never written one before. But there are so many biographies, especially in the business biography field, of guys and women who they've accomplished a lot. They're innovative, they're fascinating character studies, but they're not necessarily great leadership role models. These are not exactly people you want to look up to. They've got their foibles. I'm not saying Ken's a perfect human being. He definitely has his flaws, and we can talk about those. But I just thought, boy, more than ever right now, we could use a story of somebody who, nice guy who finished first. He's truly an inspirational leadership role model.
Yeah, it was a refreshing read, because I too have read biographies of leaders who probably weren't great leaders, but they built really successful businesses. Elon Musk was one of them. Yeah, Steve Jobs, I think he was a little harsh, but brilliant leaders.
Exactly. Jack Welch, let's just fire the bottom 10% of the organization every year. Keep it, they're fascinating, but they're not necessarily, I don't necessarily want to put those books in the hands of young leaders, right?
Yeah. You describe, so you go back in history with Ken's life, and there was this magical moment in his high school era where, basketball was a love, and he's really good at it too. Took a shot against coach's advice. I think people were screaming, no, don't shoot it. And sure enough, he swishes the big shot. People go crazy. And you've said it was a foreshadowing for a pattern in Ken's life, that this bold tendency to take long shots and score big. How did that foreshadow the rest of his life, based on that?
It did. I think the key here is that Ken doesn't have a big ego. It's not coming from ego. He loves to play. He says, life is a very special occasion. Don't miss it. And he had this incredible outside jump shot. Yeah, that game you talked about, it went into double overtime. And so it was, whoever scored the next basket was going to win. And Ken was 30 feet out, from the basket, and he sees an opening, and he cocks the ball, and his coach is just screaming, no, and he does it. And, he did that over and over. Starting the company, he had no skills to start a company. Well, how that company started, he was a college professor, and he took a sabbatical in San Diego, and he was asked to speak at the Young President's Organization at a conference. And he was so charismatic and so compelling, and his material was so new and exciting that he got this huge standing ovation. And the leaders of the conference came up to him and said, Blanchard, what are you doing next? And he said, I'm going to go back to the University of Massachusetts and continue teaching organizational leadership, and they said, you're crazy. When you're hot, you got to start a company. And as I mentioned earlier, he said, I can't balance my checkbook. How am I going to start a company? But, he and his wife, Margie, very important person in his life, they took the risk. I mean, they took the risk. They ended up putting all their money into starting this organization, and that was a big risk. The 1 Minute Manager, when that book came out, at the time that book came out, business books were long and dry and boring. And here comes Ken and Spencer, and they write this skinny little parable about a young man looking for an effective manager. And even the people around Ken at that time said, "This is an embarrassment. You can't publish this book. You're going to be the laughing stock." But, he just had a feeling, and he doesn't have a huge ego. Like, why not? His feeling is why not? He doesn't ask why, he asks why not. So positive thinker.
Ken's mother was a very important person in his life, and Dorothy is her name, taught him a lesson that he carried throughout life. The quote is, "You're not better than anyone else, but no one else is better than you." So how did that simple, powerful belief shape Ken's humility, his approach to leadership, and the way he treated people at every single level?
Ken really doesn't see titles. He really does. That is, when you get to know him personally, you can be the president of the United States, and he has met presidents of the United States, or you can be working in the warehouse, and he's going to see you as a divine child of God. His mom also taught him there's a pearl of goodness in everyone, dig for it. And so another lesson he learned was when he was in 7th grade, he won the president of his 7th grade class. And he was really proud of himself. And he went running home, "Mom, Dad, I'm the president of the 7th grade class." And his father, who retired as a rear admiral in the Navy, taught him one of his first leadership lessons. He said, "Ken, that is fantastic. I'm so proud of you. You're the president of the 7th grade class. But now that you have that title, don't ever use it. People follow leaders because they trust them and respect them, not because they have a title." And Ken took that message to heart. He just really believes that everybody has something to share, everybody's valuable.
You described how Ken's introduction to the Young Presidents Organization, most people know it as YPO, became a pivotal chapter in his journey. And he was surrounded by top executives who were actually eager to learn and grow as leaders and people. How did Ken's experience with YPO influence his understanding of leadership? And in what ways did it help shape his philosophies that he would later share with the world?
That's a really good question, Brandon, because it was huge. YPO was very huge. The Blanchard organization got a lot of their early clients from YPO connections. But also, by doing a lot of work with YPO, Ken and Margie, the co-founder of the Blanchard organization, were able to see what worked and what didn't. So, and one of the things that they saw over and over again that didn't work is when people put an emphasis on success and career to the detriment of their marriage and relationships, or watching people go for success, 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 and not paying attention to people and relationships. So I think that is really what they took away. But they got a tremendous amount. It's a great organization.
The early days of, I think it's before they started the company, Ken and Margie gathered some close friends together, and I think they put together this like founder's dream, which is shaped of create opportunities for people they love, make a difference, and have fun. And in a world where it was very hierarchical leadership during that time, at least that's what was being taught, and many of the leaders acted that way. How is this founder's dream and vision so different than anything else that you'd seen?
Well, you're right. It was before the Blanchard organization was founded. The Ken and Margie were at Cornell University. Ken had a lot of really brilliant doctoral students around him at University of Massachusetts Amherst. And they would have fun and get together, and they were dear, dear friends. And they'd, stay up talking about how we're going to make the world a better place. We're going to change the world. So they had this dream that they would found an organization that would, everybody has a job. Everybody has to go to work. What if the workplace could be a place where people felt loved and valued and all these things that were super radical at that time. This was still the 70s, it was still that sort of military model of top down command and control. There were supervisors, SUPER, and subordinates, right? So there was really that hierarchical mindset. It's funny, when they set out and set the goals for their organization, they forgot to put making money or success in there. Like that was so far from their idea, and eventually, of course, they had to do that because you can't stay in business unless you have, the financing for it. But truly it came from that. And those same founders, what's really incredible to me is that the organization, the Blanchard organization, was started in 1979. Those same founders are still with the company. A couple of them have passed away now, but they stayed with Margie and Ken through decades and decades and decades. And I think that right there tells you about the culture of the organization and how much it meant to all of them.
I think when you have a concrete vision like that, which is not necessarily of success and money, those things are a byproduct of your true purpose, I believe. And clearly they had it so perfectly stated and everybody was aligned around that no wonder they're successful.
Yes. And the biography really, it shows, they ran into all the same problems that all organizations run into, and which is one of the reasons that Margie, Ken's wife in particular, said it's a great idea to have an organization because we will have the same problems that we're trying to help our clients solve, with personnel and with motivation and with lean quarters and the whole 9 yards. And so they were able to put their ideas to work right there in their organization.
Well, life is messy, and even for Ken Blanchard, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And the year of 1979 sounds like it was a pretty bad one. Ken lost his father, his sister passed, and then a businessman who helped Ken start the company passed as well, all within a 12-month period. How did that shape Ken's life right after that? Because it sounds like he had immediate success right after that, but I'm just curious, what was his mindset during that troubled period?
Well, I think he really leaned on Margie. They were so traumatized by those events. You mentioned Ken's father, like so many people in that generation, he was a smoker and he got cancer. There's a wonderful story in the book about a tape that Ken made for his dying father.
I actually, not gonna lie, I had some tears reading.
It
was heartfelt. It was just the fact that he listened to it over and over again was...
Yeah, exactly. And talk about catching, he poured his heart out into this cassette tape. Back in those days, he carried a cassette tape recorder and, telling his dad what he'd meant to him. And so his dad was able to listen to that over and over before he died. But yeah, his sister was a brilliant, beautiful woman who unfortunately fell victim to alcoholism. And she passed away suddenly at age 42 in 1979, which was devastating to Ken because she was his role model. He looked up to her. And then, yes, Alan Raffey, one of the advisors, just died in a plane crash. So they were shaken by that. But I think it was good that they had the company that they had planned to start. They were able to pour themselves into the work and keep going. And then shortly after that, Ken met Spencer Johnson at a cocktail party and they wrote The 1 Minute Manager. So they got through that time. But again, leaning on friends and family, the founders that we talked about, leaning on the friends and family for sure.
I want to spend some more time with The 1 Minute Manager because I believe this is what catapulted Ken to a whole different level and globally. What about that book? Because you even said in the book that it was not getting the best of reviews. So people were kind of hammering it because it was so different than anything else that was out there. But what about it made it resonate with future leaders, current leaders it was just so different. But what about it made it successful?
It's a perennial bestseller. It's available to this day as the new 1 Minute Manager. It's been updated a little. I think the publisher of the book said it best. He said it's a bathtub book. You can draw the hot water for your bath, get in the tub, read the book, and by the time the water's cold, you're done. It's so digestible, and it has these 3 secrets in it. They're timeless. They're evergreen. 1 minute goals, 1 minute praisings, and 1 minute redirects. And because it's fun to read, you can just pass it along to somebody. Everybody's too busy. As leaders, we're too busy. We don't have time to read books. You can pass along the 1 minute manager, and it's fun to read. Another thing Ken talks about is the fact that it's a story. It's a story about a young man who's looking for an effective manager. When people read a story, they let go of their judging side and they just follow along in the story. And somehow the messaging gets in there better than if you're reading a straight nonfiction book, you'll either get bored or you'll go, no, that's not right, or that's not right, or I don't agree with that. But when you're reading a story, you're just like, okay, now what happens? Now what happens to this kid? What's going to happen next? So, and then I've been in publishing a long time, and we talk about this, why some books just have that magic and some don't. If we could figure that out, we'd all be rich. It's just one of those books.
I do think like the authors that seem to do really well, like best-selling books, they're able to distill like these complicated ideas into the simplest words.
Exactly.
Anybody can read it. It's really accessibility at the end of the day.
Absolutely, it is. And so the very thing that made Ken's advisors when he was, in the Ivy Leagues, the very thing that made those academic advisors think he was not good enough was the thing that made him so successful in the world.
Yep. It's because he didn't write like them. That's why they
didn't. Exactly. He wanted to actually help people understand. In fact, when he taught courses at the University of Massachusetts, on the first day of class, he would hand out the final exam. And when the faculty found out about that, they're like, Blanchard, you can't hand out the final exam on the first day of class. And he said, I'm confused. I thought I was supposed to be teaching these kids. And they said, you are, but you can't hand out the final exam. That's not fair. And he said, not only am I going to hand out the final exam, what do you think I'm going to do all semester? I'm going to teach them the answers, because life is not about a stupid distribution curve. It's about learning.
We talked a little bit earlier about like the just traditional business mindset back when Ken and Margie were building their business, and they built the business on 4 core values: ethical behavior, relationships, success, and learning. How different was this mindset, this set of values, compared to what everybody else is doing, even the traditional management mindset of what people were talking about at the time? Were they talking about those kinds of values?
Well, now I'm a little intimidated because I know your audience is very educated, and you've got a lot of leadership experts that know a lot more about this than I do, and know a lot more about the history of leadership. But from my research, what I understand is that, at that time, really the modeling was, again, that autocratic leadership style. There was a discussion, autocratic or democratic. That was another autocratic or democratic. And of course, Ken and Dr. Paul Hersey came up with the idea that you vary your leadership style depending on, the person's competence and their on that particular task. It's not one or the other. It's not black or white. But that was very unusual to have the whole idea of leadership being centered around people. And to this day, we tend to see too many organizations that are focused on results, and they forget that there's people getting those results. People are every bit as important as the results.
As Ken's books and business expanded globally, and he kind of blew up as a celebrity in a lot of ways, how did he manage the dangers of what comes with being a celebrity?
That kind of started to happen a little bit, because it was such a meteoric rise. And I think it's hard for people in 2025 to understand what it was like when media was so concentrated. Back in 1982, you didn't have the internet. It wasn't as fractured as it is now. So when you had a hit, everybody knew about it. But Ken was blessed with dear friends that go back to grade school. I interviewed friends that took dance lessons with him in 5th grade, So they were not about to let him get a big head. And if they were out someplace and, there was a fawning fan who would come up to Ken, they would just mercilessly tease him and embarrass him in front of people. And also he always took to heart what his mom said about, you're not better than anybody else and no one's better than you. And when the 1 minute manager became so ridiculously successful, his dear friend Phil Hodges walked with him on the beach and he said, Ken, do you think this book is a success because, you're so smart and you're so great? And he said, no, you know what? I know I'm not. I know this is it can't have to do with me. There's something bigger at work. And he wanted to, he felt a stewardship about it. Like, okay, I've been blessed with this. Now, how do I make a difference in other people's lives with this fame that I have?
I think it was later on in the book, I read Ken's obituary that he written for himself. I think he did this for himself as an exercise, but he also encouraged other people to write an obituary about how they wanted to live their life and lead. Why do you think this is such a practical and powerful exercise to do? And for those who he inspired to do the same?
I love this question, Brandon, because, I've been watching, I never got around to watching 6 Feet Under.
I never did either.
Yeah, we've been watching it. It's this great old show, but it really, we all have an expiration date. We're only here. We don't know how long we're here. And there's something about writing an obituary that really focuses the mind. When you see that your life is a finite thing, it can really help you to go, what the heck am I doing here? And Ken talks about living his dash. He was born in 1939. What is he doing in that dash between? So for Ken, it was about, he wanted to be a loving teacher of simple truths to help people to awaken to the presence of God and to help and become servant leaders. That's really what he wants his life to be about. So it's an interesting exercise. I recommend it. He learned it. Actually, this could be apocryphal, but supposedly, as the story goes, when Nobel died, somebody died, and the guy who is famous for the Nobel Peace Prize, he ended up reading his own obituary. It wasn't him who died. It was his brother who died or something along those lines. But he read his obituary. And at that time, he was doing all this work I think he was making munitions or something like that. And he said, boy, I don't want to be known for making, weapons of war. I want to be known for something else. So it's a way to clarify the mind. So to all your listeners, I recommend write your own obituary.
I've never done it. I've heard of a lot of people doing it. I think I'm at a point I just turned 40, so I think now's the time to do it. I'm over the hill. Well,
yeah, one of the characters in the show I was talking about, he dies at 40. So yeah.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, what would you say, Brandon? What would you say?
Oh, put me on the spot. I mean, I mean, like with this podcast, I really want to help people grow, and I love teaching people. I actually wanted to become a teacher. I started going to school to become a teacher. So I think there's always the education component to me. It's like I like when I learn something, I'm a very naturally curious person, and I'm a total tech geek. So when I learn something new, I usually like to teach people and bring them along with the learning journey with me. So there's something in there about that. I got kids, so part of it is growing them too, and just seeing them have success in their life and build families. Like, it's all about legacy for me.
I think you're already manifesting a lot of what you want to be. You're already doing it. This podcast, there is so much good material in this podcast. So you're already teaching a lot of us.
You describe how Ken lived out the philosophy of servant leadership. You mentioned it a couple of times, and definitely in the book. Not as just a theory, but in daily practice of lifting others up and leading with love, humility, and joy. From your perspective and just everything that you know about him and all the things that you've read, what did servant leadership truly mean to Ken, and how did he model it on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think for Ken, servant leadership, he talks about servant leadership being misunderstood. He said people think it's an oxymoron. How can you be a servant and a leader at the same time? And he says that's because they don't understand. There are two parts of leadership. There's the visionary part, where if you're a leader, you set the vision, right? But once that vision is set, you turn that hierarchical pyramid upside down, and now your job is to serve the people who are implementing that vision. So there's a story in the book that, to me, tells you what a servant leader Ken is. He was meeting with a guy named Mac Anderson, who, I don't know, in the 80s, there used to be these posters, Successories was the company, and they had posters like inspiration, encouragement. You'd see these uplifting images. And so that was Mac Anderson. And he had come to meet with Ken about writing a book, and they were going to collaborate on a book together. So they were in this meeting, and there was a knock on the door, and it turned out that It was the widow of an employee at Blanchard who had passed away. And she was just coming to see if she could say hi to Ken. And of course, he's in this business meeting, right? But Ken stops the meeting. He said, Mac, do you have a few minutes here? What's your time like today? And Mac said, I'm fine. I have all afternoon. He said, I want you to meet. This is the wife of one of our most beloved employees. And let's all go over to the warehouse where he worked and let's talk to his colleagues. And so Ken went over to the warehouse with Mac and the widow, and he pulled out his trusty tape recorder, and he asked all of this guy's colleagues, what was it like working with him? Tell us a story about him. And he captured all this on tape. And then at the end of about 45 minutes, he handed the tape to the widow and he said, here, keep this as a memento and just know how much we loved your husband. To me, that is servant leadership. It's like, it's putting the other person first. And confession, I am not that kind of person. I am so task oriented. And Ken would tease me about this because, I want to get down to business. We've got books to write, right? And, I would say, Ken, what's your favorite part of the day? And he said, I love interruptions. I hate interruptions, but Ken loved interruptions because it meant another opportunity to serve someone.
Well, being as close to Ken as you have been for so many years, and you know his work so intimately, what do you believe is like his lasting legacy when it comes to inspiring the future leaders?
I think the legacy is in the title of the book, Catch People Doing Things Right. As human beings, we have this negative bias. It's not our fault. This is how our species survived. We looked around the savannah, and if something was going wrong, we jumped on it before it killed us, right? But that really doesn't work in the workplace or in relationships or when you're leading people. You don't want to be catching people doing things wrong. I'm not talking about, I know you've talked in your podcast, Brandon, about, toxic positivity. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about meaningful praise and feedback, letting people know, hey, when you did this, this is how it made me feel. This is the difference you made in my life. And Ken always says, who needs acknowledgement? Everybody who's breathing. So there's just not enough. We're just, as a culture, look at the world we're in. As a culture, all we do all day long is catch each other doing things wrong. Let's turn that around. Let's catch people doing things right, even if you don't agree with them politically, whatever. I know I'm bordering on toxic positivity, but honestly, I think we need it. So I think that is Ken's legacy. Yeah, he said, if somebody once asked him, if you could only take away one leadership lesson out of everything you've taught, what would it be? And that was what he said, catch people doing things right.
Martha, I've loved this conversation. It's been so good. And the book is really good too. It just so vividly captures his life and the legacy that he will leave for all of us. With as many books as he's written, so many people have at least read one of his books, and The One-Minute Manager is clearly the most popular one. But thank you for coming on. What do you want to plug besides the book? I know it's out today. By the time this releases, it'll be a few weeks, but what do you want to plug?
Well, let me just say, Brandon, thank you so much. It's just an honor. You are a great teacher, and it's just been an honor to write the book. Let's see, I guess what I would say is, if you know anyone who's a young leader or who needs an inspiring story, this is a good book to pass along. Since your audience is a bunch of HR people and leaders and business people, check out Blanchard.com. Everything Ken has taught and more is, whether you're an individual contributor or whether you're a giant organization needing a huge initiative, there's something for you at Blanchard.com. And if you want to know more about the book, MarthaLawrence.com has information about the book.
My guest today has been Martha Lawrence, the author of the brand new book, Catch People Doing Things Right, How Ken Blanchard Changed the Way That World Leads. Martha, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Take care.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Xenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Zenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent, so discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.